Homo sapiens, archaic Homo heidelbergensis, and Cro-Magnon man. Archaic Homo sapiens is the last step before contemporary man in the imaginary evolutionary scheme. In fact, evolutionists do not have much to say about these fossils, as there are only very minor differences between them and today's human beings. Some researchers even state that representatives of this race are still living today and point to native Australians as an example. Like Homo sapiens archaic, native Australians also have thick protruding eyebrows, an inward inclined mandibular structure, and a slightly smaller cranial capacity. The group characterized as Homo heidelbergensis in evolutionist literature is in fact the same as archaic Homo sapiens. The reason why two different terms are used to define the same human racial type is the disagreements among evolutionists. All the fossils included under the Homo heidelbergensis classification suggest that people who were anatomically very similar to today's Europeans lived 5 lakh and even 7 lakh 40,000 years ago, first in England and then in Spain. It is estimated that Cro-Magnon man lived 30,000 years ago. He has a dome-shaped cranium and a broad forehead. His cranium of 1600 cc is above the average for contemporary man. His skull has thick eyebrow projections and a bony protrusion at the back that is characteristic of both Neanderthal man and Homo erectus. Although the Cro-Magnon is considered to be a European race, the structure and volume of Cro-Magnon's cranium look very much like those of some races living in Africa and the tropics today. Relying on this similarity, it is estimated that Cro-Magnon was an archaic African race. Some other paleoanthropological finds have shown that the Cro-Magnon and the Neanderthal races intermixed and laid the foundation for the races of our day. As a result, none of these human beings were primitive species. They were different human beings who lived in earlier times and either assimilated and mixed with other races or become extinct and disappeared from history. Species living in the same age as their ancestors. What we have investigated so far forms a clear picture. The scenario of human evolution is a complete fiction. In order for such a family tree to represent the truth, a gradual evolution from ape to man must have taken place, and a fossil record of this process should be able to be found. In fact, however, there is a huge gap between apes and humans. Skeletal structures, cranial capacities, and such criteria as walking upright or bent sharply forward distinguishing humans from apes. We already mentioned that on the basis of recent research done in 1994 on the inner ear, Australopithecus and Homo habilis were reclassified as apes, while Homo erectus was reclassified as a fully modern man. Another significant finding proving that there can be no family tree relationship among these different species is that species that are presented as ancestors of others in fact lived concurrently. If, as evolutionists claim, Australopithecus changed into Homo habilis, which in turn turned into Homo erectus. The periods they live in should necessarily have followed each other. However, there is no such chronological order to be seen in the fossil record. According to evolutionist estimates, Australopithecus lived from 4 million up until 1 million years ago. The creatures classified as Homo habilis, on the other hand, are thought to have lived until 1.7 to 1.9 million years ago. Homo rudolfensis, which is said to have been more advanced than Homo habilis, is known to be as old as from 2.5 to 2.8 million years. That is to say, Homo rudolfensis is nearly 1 million years older than Homo habilis, of which it is alleged to have been the ancestor. On the other hand, the age of Homo erectus goes as far back as 1.6 to 1.8 million years ago, which means that Homo erectus appeared on the earth in the same time frame as its so-called ancestor Homo habilis. Alan Walker confirms this fact by stating that, and quote, "There is evidence from East Africa for late surviving small Australopithecus individuals that were contemporaneous first with Homo habilis, then with Homo erectus. Louis Leakey has found fossils of Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus almost next to each other in the Olduvai Gorge region of Tanzania, in the bed 2 layer. There is definitely no such family tree. Stephen Jay Gould, who was a paleontologist from Harvard University, explained this deadlock faced by evolution, although he was an evolutionist himself. And quote, "What has become of our ladder if there are three coexisting lineages of hominids, Australopithecus afaricanus, the robust Australopithecines, and the Homo habilis, none clearly derived from another. Moreover, none of three display any evolutionary trends during their tenure on Earth." 26,000-year-old needle. An interesting fossil showing that the Neanderthals had knowledge of clothing. A needle 26,000 years old. Johanson B. Edgar from Lucy to Language, page 99. When we move on from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, we again see that there is no family tree to talk about. There is evidence showing that Homo erectus and archaic Homo sapiens continued living up to 27,000 years, and even as recently as 10,000 years before our time. In the cow swamp in Australia, some 13,000-year-old Homo erectus skulls have been found. On the island of Java, Homo erectus remains were found that are 27,000 years old. The secret history of Homo sapiens. The most interesting and significant fact that nullifies the very basis of imaginary family tree of evolutionary theory is the unexpectedly ancient history of man. Paleoanthropological findings reveal that Homo sapiens, people who looked exactly like us, were living as long as 1 million years ago. It was Louis Leakey, the famous evolutionist paleoanthropologist, who discovered the first findings on this subject. In 1932, in the Kanjera region around Lake Victoria in Kenya, Leakey found several fossils that belonged to the Middle Pleistocene and that were no different from today's man. However, the Middle Pleistocene was 1 million years ago. Since these discoveries turned the evolutionary family tree upside down, they were dismissed by some evolutionist paleoanthropologists. Yet Leakey always contended that his estimates were correct. Just when this controversy was about to be forgotten, a fossil unearthed in Spain in 1995 revealed in a very remarkable way that the history of Homo sapiens was much older than had been assumed. The fossil in question was uncovered in a cave called Grandolina in the Atapuerca region of Spain by 3 Spanish paleoanthropologists from the University of Madrid. The fossil revealed the face of an 11-year-old boy who looked entirely like man of our day. Yet it had been 8 lakh years since the child died. Discover magazine covered the story in great detail in its December 1997 issue. This fossil even shook the convictions of Juan Luis Arzuaga Ferraras, who led the Grandolina excavation. Ferraras said, and quote, "We expected something big, something large, something inflated, something primitive. Our expectation of an 800,000-year-old boy was something like Turkana boy. and what we found was a totally modern face. To me, this is most spectacular. These are the kinds of things that shake you. Finding something totally unexpected like that. Not finding fossils. Finding fossils in us is unexpected too, and it's okay. But the most spectacular thing is finding something you thought belonged to the present in the past. It's like finding something like like a tape recorder in Grandolina. That would be very surprising. We don't expect cassettes and tape recorders in the lower Pleistocene. Finding a modern face 8 lakh years ago, it's the same thing. We were very surprised when we saw it. The fossil highlighted the fact that the history of Homo sapiens had to be extended back to 8 lakh years ago. After recovering from the initial shock, the evolutionists who discovered the fossil decided that it belonged to a different species. Because according to the evolutionary family tree, Homo sapiens did not live 8 lakh years ago. Therefore, they made up an imaginary species called Homo antecessor and included the Atapuerca skull under this classification. A hut 1.7 million years old. Findings of a 1.7 million year old hut shocked the scientific community. It looked like the huts used by some Africans today. There have been many findings demonstrating that Homo sapiens dates back even earlier than 8 lakh years. One of them is a discovery by Louis Leakey in the early 1970s in Olduvai, Gorg. Here in the bed second layer, Leakey discovered that Australopithecus, Homo habilis and Homo erectus species had coexisted at the same time. What is even more interesting was a structure Leakey found in the same layer, bed 2. Here he found the remains of a stone hut. The unusual aspect of the event was that this construction, which is still used in some parts of Africa, could only have been built by Homo sapiens. So according to Leakey's findings, Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus and today's man must have coexisted approximately 1.7 million years ago. This discovery must surely invalidate the evolutionary theory that claims that man evolved from ape-like species such as Australopithecus. Footprints of today's man, 3.6 million years old. Indeed, some other discoveries trace the origins of present-day man back to 1.7 million years ago. One of these important finds is the footprints found in Letioli, Tanzania by Mary Leakey in 1977. These footprints were found in a layer that was calculated to be 3.6 million years old, and more importantly, they were no different from the footprints that a contemporary man would leave. The footprints found by Mary Leakey were later examined by a number of famous paleoanthropologists such as Donald Johanson and Tim White. The results were the same. White wrote, and quote, "Make no mistake about it, they are like modern human footprints. If one were left in the sand of a California beach today, and a 4-year-old were asked what it was, he would instantly say that somebody had walked there. He wouldn't be able to tell it from 100 other prints on the beach, nor would you." After examining the footprints, Louis Robbins from the University of North Carolina made the following comments. "The arch is raised. The smaller individual had a higher arch than I do, and the big toe is large and aligned with the second toe. The toes grip the ground like human toes. You do not see this in other animal forms." Examinations of the morphological form of the footprint showed time and again that they had to be accepted as the prints of a human and moreover a present-day human, Homo sapiens. Russell Tuttle, who also examined the footprints, wrote, "A small barefoot Homo sapiens could have made them. In all discernible morphological features, the feet of the individuals that made the trails are indistinguishable from those of modern humans." Impartial examinations of the footprints revealed their real owners. In reality, these footprints consisted of 20 fossilized footprints of a 10-year-old, present-day human, and 27 footprints of an even younger one. They were certainly normal people like us. The situation put the Letioli footprints at the center of discussions for years. Evolutionist paleoanthropologists desperately tried to come up with an explanation, as it was hard for them to accept the fact that a contemporary man had been walking on the earth 3.6 million years ago. During the 1990s, the following explanation started to take shape. The evolutionists decided that these footprints must have been left by an Australopithecus, because according to their theory, it was impossible for a Homo species to have existed 3.6 years ago. However, Russell H. Tuttle wrote the following in an article in 1990, end quote. In sum, the 3.5 million year old footprint traits at Latioli site G resemble those of habitually unshod modern humans. None of their features suggest that the Latioli hominids were less capable bipeds than we are. If the G footprints were not known to be so old, we would readily conclude that they had been made by a member of our genus Homo. In any case, we should shelve the loose assumption that the Latioli footprints were made by Lucy's kind, Australopithecus afarensis. To put it briefly, these footprints that were supposed to be 3.6 million years old could not have belonged to Australopithecus. The only reason why the footprints were thought to have been left by members of Australopithecus was the 3.6 million year old volcanic layer in which the footprints were found. The prints were ascribed to Australopithecus purely on the assumption that humans could not have lived so long ago. These interpretations of the Latioli footprints demonstrated one important fact. Evolutionists support their theory not based on scientific findings, but in spite of them. Here we have a theory that is blindly defended no matter what, with all new findings that cause the theory into doubt being either ignored or distorted to support the theory. Briefly, the theory of evolution is not science, but a dogma kept alive despite science. The bipedalism impasse of evolution. Apart from the fossil record that we have dealt with so far, unbridgeable anatomical gaps between men and apes also invalidate the fiction of human evolution. One of these has to do with the manner of walking. Human beings walk upright on 2 feet. This is a very special form of locomotion, not seen in any other mammalian species. Some other animals do have a limited ability to move when they stand on their 2 hind feet. Animals like bears and monkeys can move in this way only rarely, such as when they want to reach a source of food, and even then only for a short time. Normally, their skeletons lean forward and they walk on all fours. Well, then has bipedalism evolved from the quadrupedal gait of apes as evolutionists claim? Of course not. Research has shown that the evolution of bipedalism never occurred, nor is it possible for it to have done so. First of all, bipedalism is not an evolutionary advantage. The way in which monkeys move is much easier, faster, and more efficient than man's bipedal stride. Man can neither move by jumping from tree to tree without descending to the ground like a chimpanzee, nor run at a speed of 125 km per hour like a cheetah. On the contrary, since man walks on 2 feet, he moves much more slowly on the ground. For the same reason, he is one of the most unprotected of all species in nature in terms of movement and defense. According to the logic of the theory of evolution, monkeys should not have evolved to adopt a bipedal stride. Humans should instead have evolved to become quadrupedal. Another impasse of the evolutionary claim is that bipedalism does not serve the gradual development model of Darwinism. This model, which constitutes the basis of evolution, requires that there should be a compound stride between bipedalism and quadrupedalism. However, with a computerized research he conducted in 1996, the English paleoanthropologist Robin Crompton showed that such a compound stride was not possible. Crompton reached the following conclusion: a living being can either walk upright or on all fours. A type of stride between the two is impossible because it would involve excessive energy consumption. This is why a half bipedal being cannot exist. Recent researchers revealed that it is impossible for the bent ape skeleton fit for quadrupedal stride to evolve into upright human skeleton fit for bipedal stride. The immense gap between man and ape is not limited solely to bipedalism. Many other issues still remain unexplained, such as brain capacity, the ability to talk, and so on. Ilian Morgan, an evolutionist paleoanthropologist, makes the following confession in relation to this matter. 4 of the most outstanding mysteries about humans are: number 1, why do they walk on two legs? Number 2, why have they lost their fur? Number 3, why have they developed such large brains? And number 4, why did they learn to speak? The orthodox answers to these questions are: number 1, we do not yet know; number 2, we do not yet know; number 3, we do not yet know; number 4, we do not yet know. The list of questions could be considerably lengthened without affecting the monotony of the answers. Evolution, an unscientific faith. Lord Solly Zuckerman is one of the most famous and respected scientists in the United Kingdom. For years, he studied the fossil record and conducted many detailed investigations. He was elevated to the peerage for his contributions to science. Zuckerman is an evolutionist. Therefore, his comments on evolution cannot be regarded as ignorant or prejudiced. After years of research on the fossils included in the human evolution scenario, however, he reached the conclusion that there is no truth to the family tree in that is put forward. Zuckerman also advanced an interesting concept of the spectrum of the sciences, ranging from those he considered scientific to those he considered unscientific. According to Zuckerman's spectrum, the most scientific, that is depending on concrete data fields, are chemistry and physics. After them come the biological sciences and then the social sciences. At the far end of the spectrum, which is the part considered to be most unscientific, are extrasensory perception concepts such as telepathy and the sixth sense, and finally human evolution. Zuckerman explains his reasoning as follows, and quote, "We then move right of the register of objective truth into those fields of presumed biological science, like extrasensory perception on the interpretation of man's fossil history, where to the faithful anything is possible, and where the ardent believer is sometimes able to believe several contradictory things at the same time." The myth of human evolution is based on no scientific findings whatsoever. Representations such as the above have no other significance than reflecting evolutionist imaginative wishful thinking. Robert Locke, the editor of Discovering Archaeology, an important publication on the origins of man, writes in that journal, "The search for human ancestors gives more heat than light," quoting the confession of the famous evolutionist paleoanthropologist Tim White, and quote, "We are all frustrated by all the questions we haven't been able to answer." Locke's article reviews the impasse of the theory of evolution on the origins of man and the groundlessness of the propaganda spread about this subject. And quote, "Perhaps no area of science is more contentious than the search for human origins. Elite paleontologists disagree over even the most basic outlines of the human family tree. New branches grow amid great fanfare, only to wither and die in the face of new fossil finds." The same fact was also recently accepted by Henry Gee, the editor of the well-known journal Nature. In his book In Search of Deep Time, published in 1999, Gee points out that all the evidence for human evolution between 10 and 5 million years ago, several thousand generations of living creatures, can be fitted into a small box. He concludes that conventional theories of the origin and development of human beings are a completely human invention, created after the fact, shaped to accord with human prejudices, and adds, and quote, "To take a line of fossils and claim that they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carries the same validity as bedtime story amusing, perhaps even instructive but not scientific." What then is the reason that makes so many scientists so tenacious about this dogma? Why have they been trying so hard to keep their theory alive, at the cost of having to admit countless conflicts and discarding the evidence they have found? The only answer is their being afraid of the fact they will have to face in case of abandoning the theory of evolution. The fact they will have to face when they abandon evolution is that Allah has created man. However, considering the presuppositions they have and the materialistic philosophy they believe in, creation is an unacceptable concept for evolutionists. For this reason, they deceive themselves as well as the world by using the media with which they cooperate. If they cannot find the necessary fossils, they fabricate them either in the form of imaginary pictures or fictitious models and try to give the impression that there indeed exist fossils verifying evolution. A part of mass media who share their materialistic point of view also try to deceive the public and instill the story of evolution in people's subconscious. No matter how hard they try, the truth is evident. Man has come into existence not through an evolutionary process, but by Allah's creation. Therefore, he is responsible to him. Chapter 10: The Molecular Impasse of Evolution. In the previous sections of this book, we have shown how the fossil record invalidates the theory of evolution. In point of fact, there was no need for us to relate any of that, because the theory of evolution collapses long before one gets to any claims about the evidence of fossils. The subject that renders the theory meaningless from the very outset is the question of how life first appeared on Earth. When it addresses this question, evolutionary theory claims that life started with a cell that was formed by chance. According to this scenario, 4 billion years ago, various lifeless chemical compounds underwent a reaction in the primordial atmosphere on the Earth, in which the effects of thunderbolts and atmospheric pressure led to the formation of the first living cell. The first thing that must be said is that the claim that inanimate materials can come together to form life is an unscientific one that has not been verified by any experiment or observation. Life is only generated from life. Each living cell is formed by the replication of the other cell. No one in the world has ever succeeded in forming a living cell by bringing inanimate materials together, not even in the most advanced laboratories. The theory of evolution claims that a living cell, which cannot be produced even when all the power of the human intellect, knowledge, and technology are brought to bear, nevertheless managed to form by chance under primordial conditions of the earth. In the following pages, we will examine why this claim is contrary to the most basic principles of science and reason. The tale of the cell produced by chance. If one believes that a living cell can come into existence by coincidence, then there is nothing to prevent one from believing a similar story that we will relate below. It is the story of a town. One day, a lump of clay pressed between the rocks in a barren land becomes wet after it rains. The wet clay dries and hardens when the sun rises, and takes on a stiff, resistant form. Afterwards, these rocks, which also served as a mold, are somehow smashed into pieces, and then a neat, well-shaped and strong brick appears. This brick waits under the same natural conditions for years for a similar brick to be formed. This goes on until hundreds and thousands of the same bricks have been formed in the same place. However, by chance, none of the bricks that were previously formed are damaged. Although exposed to storm, rain, wind, scorching sun, and freezing cold for thousands of years, the bricks do not crack, break up, or get dragged away, but wait there in the same place with the same determination for other bricks to form. When the number of bricks is adequate, they erect a building by being arranged sideways and on top of each other, having been randomly dragged along by the effects of natural conditions such as winds, storms, or tornadoes. Meanwhile, materials such as cement or soil mixtures form under natural conditions with perfect timing and creep between the bricks to clamp them to each other. While all this is happening, iron ore under the ground is shaped under natural conditions and lays the foundations of a building that is to be formed with these bricks. At the end of this process, a complete building rises with all its materials, carpentry, and installations intact. Of course, a building does not only consist of foundations, bricks, and cement. How, then, are the other missing materials to be obtained? The answer is simple. All kinds of materials that are needed for the construction of the building exist in the earth on which it is erected. Silicon for the glass, copper for the electric cables, iron for the columns, beams, water pipes, etc. all exist under the ground in abundant quantities. It takes only the skill of natural conditions to shape and place these materials inside the building. All the installations, carpentry, and accessories are placed among the bricks with the help of the blowing wind, rain, and earthquakes. Everything has gone so well that the bricks are arranged so as to leave the necessary window spaces as if they knew that something called glass would be formed later on by natural conditions. Moreover, they have not forgotten to leave some space to allow the installation of water, electricity, and heating systems, which are also later to be formed by coincidence. Everything has gone so well that coincidences and natural conditions produced a perfect design. If you have managed to sustain your belief in the story so far, then you should have no trouble surmising how the town's other buildings, plants, highways, sidewalks, substructures, communications, and transportation systems came about. If you possess technical knowledge and are fairly conversant with the subject, you can even write an extremely scientific book of a few volumes stating your theories about the evolutionary process of a sewage system and its uniformity with the present structures. You may well be honored with academic awards for your clever studies and may consider yourself a genius, shedding light on the nature of humanity. The theory of evolution, which claims that life came into existence by chance, is no less absurd than our story. For with all its operational systems and systems of communication, transportation, and management, a cell is no less complex than a city. Confessions from Evolutionists. The theory of evolution faces no greater crisis than on the point of explaining the emergence of life. The reason is that organic molecules are so complex that their formation cannot possibly be explained as being coincidental, and it is manifestly impossible for an organic cell to have been found by chance. Evolutionists confronted this question of the origin of life in the second quarter of the 20th century. One of the leading authorities of the theory of molecular evolution, the Russian evolutionist Alexander Oparin, said this in his book, The Origin of Life, which was published in 1936. And quote, "Unfortunately, the origin of the cell remains a question which is actually the darkest point of the complete evolution theory. Since Oparin, evolutionists have performed countless experiments, conducted research, and made observations to prove that a cell could have been found by chance. However, every such attempt only made clearer the complex structure of the cell and thus refuted the evolutionists' hypothesis even more. Professor Klaus Doss, the president of the Institute of Biochemistry at the University of Johannes Gutenberg, states, and quote, "More than 30 years of experimentation on the origin of life in the fields of chemical and molecular evolution have led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth rather than to its solution. At present, all discussions on principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance." The following statement by the geochemist Jeffrey Bada from San Diego Scripps Institute makes clear the helplessness of evolutionists concerning this impasse. "Today, as we have lived the 20th century, we still face the biggest unsolved problem that we have when we entered the 20th century. How did life originate on Earth?" The miracle in the cell and the end of evolution. The complex structure of the living cell was unknown in Darwin's day and at the time. Ascribing life to coincidences and natural conditions was thought by evolutionists to be convincing enough. The technology of the 20th century has delved into the tiniest particles of life and has revealed that the cell is the most complex system mankind has ever confronted. Today, we know that the cell contains power stations producing the energy to be used by the cell, factories manufacturing the enzymes and hormones essential for life, a data bank where all the necessary information about all products to be produced is recorded, complex transportation systems and pipelines for carrying raw materials and products from one place to another, advanced laboratories and refineries for breaking down external raw materials into their usable parts, and specialized cell membrane proteins to control the incoming and outgoing materials. And these constitute only a small part of this incredibly complex system. W.S. Thorpe, an evolutionist scientist, acknowledged that, and quote, "The most elementary type of cell constitutes a mechanism unimaginably more complex than any machine yet thought up, let alone constructed by man. A cell is so complex that even the high level of technology attained today cannot produce one. No effort to create an artificial cell has ever met with success. Indeed, all attempts to do so have been abandoned." The complexity of the cell. Nucleus. All the information regarding the human body is recorded as a complex code in the DNA molecule here in the nucleus of the cell. Cell membrane. Thanks to the selective permeability of the cell membrane, The membrane performs the final selection of which molecules can enter and leave the cell. Mitochondria, the cell's main source of energy. Here are synthesized all the ATP molecules necessary for bodily functions. Endoplasmic reticulum, isolation and transportation of proteins and other molecules. Cell membrane gates, these absorb oxygen and glucose and expel substances such as proteins and enzymes synthesized by the cell. The cell is the most complex and most elegant system man has ever witnessed. Professor of Biology Michael Denton, in his book titled Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, explains this complexity with an example. And quote, to grasp the reality of life as it has been revealed by molecular biology, we must magnify a cell 1,000 million times until it is 20 kilometers in diameter and resembles a giant airship large enough to cover a great city like London or New York. What we would then see would be an object of unparalleled complexity and a marvelous structure. On the surface of the cell, we would see millions of openings like portholes of a vast spaceship, opening and closing to allow a continual stream of materials to flow in and out. If we were to enter one of these openings, we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity, a complexity beyond our own creative capacities, a reality which is the very antithesis of coincidence, which excels in every sense anything produced by the intelligence of man. The theory of evolution claims that the system which mankind, with all the intelligence, knowledge, and technology at its disposal, cannot succeed in reproducing, came into existence by chance under the conditions of the primordial earth. To give another example, the probability of forming of a cell by chance is about the same as that of producing a perfect copy of a book following an explosion in a printing house. The English mathematician and astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle made a similar comparison in an interview published in Nature magazine on November 12, 1981. Although an evolutionist himself, Hoyle stated that the chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable to the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. This means that it is not possible for the cell to have come into being by coincidence, and therefore it must definitely have been created. One of the basic reasons why the theory of evolution cannot explain how the cell came into existence is the irreducible complexity in it. A living cell maintains itself with the harmonious cooperation of many organelles. If only one of these organelles fails to function, the cell cannot remain alive. It is not possible for a cell to wait for unconscious mechanisms like natural selection or mutation to permit it to develop. Thus, the first cell on the earth was necessarily a complete cell possessing all the required organelles and functions, and this definitely means that the cell had to have been created.